Well, I think a lot of people tend to focus on that one date, February 1, 1960, when those 4 students sat down at Woolworth's in Greensboro, North Carolina. The fact of the matter is, things had been stirring for a long time. Then I remember this case involving the NAACP in Sumter, Nash versus the NAACP. A lawyer had sued the NAACP trying to open up their records so that they could get at this membership, so that people would be fired from their jobs and all of that. These things, I went off to college with all of that hanging in my background. So all of this was a part of me. My father was saying prayers over breakfast for Reverend DeLand and the people over in Summerton, South Carolina. We were active in the youth branch of the NAACP. So it should not have been a surprise to anybody that as people like myself going through these kinds of things in their communities, they all ended up on college campuses. So it was right for this sort of thing. So when those 4 students sat down, it proved to be a catalyst. Now, I tell people all the time that one of the most interesting things about all of this is that these things had very little to do with what a lot of people wrote about in those days. I was picked to be the star witness in that case because they were going to only put 1 student on the stand. Now, the reason for that is because a lot of students who involved themselves in these activities, if they ever got arrested, their names were plastered on the newspapers back in their hometowns, and all of this was considered to be an invitation for things to happen to their families, like losing jobs and all kinds of stuff. And so Matthew Perry, who's now a federal judge on senior status, and Ida Quincy Newman, who was the field secretary, field director of the NAACP, both of them knew my parents and knew who they were. They picked me to be the star witness only because my father was a minister and my mother a beautician, and they had no fear of a boycotting of their business or being fired from their jobs. And so that was the only reason. So it had absolutely nothing to do with me. That's a lot of things happen that way. It was after that meeting that King was arrested in Albany, Georgia. And it was that arrest in Albany, Georgia, that I will always believe changed the course of history. Because up until that incident, the vast majority of black voters in this country were supporting Richard Nixon. Now, a lot of people don't realize that, but go back and look at the numbers. Polling was not as sophisticated as it is now, but Nixon and Henry Cabot Lodge was his running mate. They were carrying the bulk of the vote, of the black vote. It was the gesture that John Kennedy made to King's wife while he was sitting in that jail in Albany, Georgia, that in my opinion shifted sentiment in this country. And Nixon still got a big slice of the black vote, but he didn't get 65, 70%, which I think he would have gotten were it not for that. Well, a lot of us went to jail. I There was only one big arrest in the case that I couldn't think of before. The name of it was Fields against South Carolina. That was the biggest case because, you know, you're out, you're challenging these unjust laws, and you go to jail, and then you get tried, you get found guilty, then you start the appeal process. So while all that was going on, that was okay with some people. We got the case. Let's sit back and wait on it to work its way through the courts. Those of us who were students were a little more activists in that. It wasn't okay with us. We didn't want to wait 25 years or whatever long it took to get these cases through the court. A lot of us were hell-bent on direct action now. I don't think the mission has changed at all, but I think the approaches have to change. And I'm writing a little something about that right now, because one of the big problems we've had with these issues is that a lot of people don't seem to realize. We look at back when we were doing things in the 50s, you dealt with what was called the Warren Court, the Supreme Court headed by Earl Warren. That was a different Supreme Court than the one that's led by Roberts today. And the fact of the matter is, when those things happen, and people say they don't seem to understand, you know, in the Dred Scott 1854, I think, decision of the Dred Scott, that was the Supreme Court. You know, the 1896-98 decision of Pleasant versus Ferguson, that was the Supreme Court. 1954 Brown, the Supreme Court. You know, and I'm going to get into some of the cases that we're dealing with currently, the most recent one of which having to do with the FCC and making corporations, giving corporations the same free speech capacity that you give individuals. All of these things, Supreme Court, different makeup. So I say to people now, if you can sit down and go through that analogy and understand it, now why is it that you cannot understand that approaches in pursuit of the same mission sometimes have to be modified, they have to be organized and implemented according to what you're dealing with. And so that's a real problem for a lot of people to understand. It was effective for the time. Oh, sure, it was very effective for the time. And that's the thing people have to understand. You know, we accept the difference in time for almost everything else. Why not that? I mean, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. Would not use the same tactics today if he lived the day that he used in the 60s. No, you have to deal with things as they are, not as you would like for them to be.